Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still on those ones and twos. And today we have a fun guest, a great guest. With the election season heating on up, we thought we'd bring in some candidates to get them rolling and get some opinions about what's going on. So today we have for you Natasha Gupta, and she is running for California Assembly District number 25. Thank you for joining us today, Natasha.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to
How's
be at
the weather in San Jose?
What?
How's the weather in San Jose?
It is pretty sunny considering that we're like at the cusp of, Thanksgiving coming around the corner.
Right. Yeah.
Smoke in the air, maybe. No?
Yeah. You've been okay with the fires?
Yeah. I mean, we're very fortunate. I think a couple of days were pretty smoky down here, but of course, nothing compared to people in, the Kincaid area and parts of LA as well.
Yeah, it was pretty bad here. I had a lot of friends who had to evacuate, and it's pretty bad. That's speaking of climate change. Let's get right to it, fam.
Sure.
Let's get right to it. So you're running for Assembly District. Why are you running? Because I know that you consider yourself a progressive. What is something that drove you to run, and what is your actual main issue? Because everybody has a core issue that they really, really are passionate about.
What really was sort of the spark that triggered me to really seriously think about running locally is when the Gilroy Garlic Festival incident had happened in our community. And in particular, I was very affected by it because I had happened to have gone to the Gilroy Garlic Festival the day before with my husband. And it was just by chance that we weren't there the day of this terrible shooting. And I think it wasn't just that this shooting had happened, but that the circumstances around who this shooter was and the fact that the ugly divisions of the country literally showed up at our front door in, frankly, in a place like California that we've always championed a culture of inclusion. We've always championed my whole life. I was born and raised in the Bay Area to immigrant parents, and they specifically chose to raise their kids here just because of that entire culture that we have. And I started really reflecting a lot more about what are the divisions even in our own neighborhood when I looked around me, and looking at even frankly my upbringing, how I grew up in this deeply conservative town as someone who was always a Democrat my whole life, and how even in the most conservative of places, there was still a sense of community and a sense of togetherness and inclusion that I think we're losing a lot of that. I think the party as well is losing a lot of that with common people like myself who work in technology, who aren't frankly traditionally part of the political process and who are not being reached out to. I can't believe how many of the people I talk to in District 25 don't even know who their assembly person is or have never had their door knocked on before. And so if we're going to really unify and we're going to really tackle that problem that I feel so deeply about, that if we don't resolve that sense of division that we have even within our own community, then we're going to completely lose out with the political system that we have and go further entrenched into a cycle of the establishment guys dictating things that the constituency really doesn't want, and having political power just handed over to the next person in line rather than those who are duly elected by the people.
Yeah. So you would say your core issue then is sowing the seeds of division, of stopping. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Your core issue is bringing people together.
Yeah.
Would you say that? So
yes, absolutely.
What do you think engulfs the flames of the division now? What do you think is the number one cause of why we are so divided then?
So I think the number one cause is how, number one, people are so disengaged from their government because, frankly, we have all lost complete faith in the government to be able to proactively be a part of the solution. Is talking about a state like California, for instance, where we have had a slew of Democratic leaders and progressive leadership in name, of a lot of the initiatives that we've done in our own state. Well, one of the problems I hear from a lot of constituents is my taxpayer dollars or my voice is being lost in actually what I visibly see in my own neighborhood. I passed a bond, for example, to get affordable housing in my own neighborhood. I found that 3 years later, the bond was not even spent towards any significant development towards affordable housing, and it was squandered to the private developers who were funding the political campaigns of the politicians you put in our local government to begin with. And that is the heart of division, right? It's the heart of saying that, if no one is going to do anything about it, why do I even vote? And why should I even care about my fellow citizen and my fellow neighbor in the community that continues to be in a difficult position? And I think that the other part of that division is not talking to each other anymore. The fact that we are so gridlocked in the party, not just with other Republicans, and we cannot seem to find points of bipartisanship, but the fact that even within the Democratic Party, we're not kind of talking to each other on certain issues and trying to find common ground with other kinds of Democrats. I feel like that is something that is reflected in our constituency, and that even though they're Democrats, there are a whole bunch of different opinions on how locally they want their politicians to act on issues. And so for me, the progressive movement is about progressing an issue and being authentic to your constituency. It's about this call we have for representation that actually looks like the communities that we serve, and really listening to the people and bringing your message to the people.
So, for you, I agree with you. I mean, I think this country is very divided, and I think I've seen a bit of a push of people trying to come together and find some sort of common ground as Americans, as as working people, as middle class, as people that have to work to make a living, and to come together as a people instead of focusing on the differences. Now, going off of that, how do you feel about the Medicare for All debate, you personally? Because that is an ongoing debate, not only in California, but obviously nationwide now with the presidential election. Where do you stand on that?
So, first of all, I believe that healthcare is a human right, and I think it is an absolute atrocity in our country that you literally can go bankrupt if you have a medical emergency, and if you don't have insurance. Now, I will say what has been interesting to me in the assembly race is that there are two different conversations going on about what the national solution needs to be versus what the statewide solution needs to be. And I say that because California traditionally has tried to be on the more progressive side of this issue, even at the local level. I mean, for example, in Alameda County, if you're under 18, you can get health care through the county at no charge. If you are in Santa Clara County and you don't have either Medi-Cal or private insurance, you can actually go through a program called PACS over here, which does give you a basic level of health insurance. And so when you look at proposals like Medicare for All on a statewide level, as opposed to the federal level, the overriding consensus with many people I talk to is that at a national level, this is something that has to be enacted. At a statewide level, there is more of an eagerness to see California perhaps adopt a public option for a statewide healthcare plan. And the reason for this is everyone is very scared. We may lose Obamacare, given the way that the current administration has packed the courts. We may lose the Senate if in the worst case scenario, and we don't have any recourse on the state level for a statewide plan that people can switch to. And so that is why, as a local initiative, on the statewide level, passing a statewide public option is our best step towards the first step towards Medicare for All. And what I really hope to see is when we pass a comprehensive plan like that we start spurring the national conversation on getting everybody on the same playing field for Medicare for All and transitioning us to a nationalized healthcare system.
Okay, yeah, because you're right. I mean, the state and the national differ a lot, and it's very difficult because I don't think we should rely on state by state, because then every state is going to have something different. And I just heard Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal talk about how it's so difficult to go about it by state. Now, I understand where you're coming from, and I totally get that. But don't you think we should push for something where everybody is covered? Or let me rephrase that. if you had an ability to sign on to legislation that supported a nationalized Medicare for all, would you sign that?
Yeah. And, I think that one of the valuable parts in this debate, when it comes to the Assembly, is we actually did have a statewide Medicare for All bill, which was proposed in the legislature. And one of the problems of this bill in why a democratically controlled assembly that it wasn't passed is because of the budget. It was a $400 billion bill, way beyond the state budget that we had in California, which right now, for example, Newsom has declared, I believe, a $209 billion budget for our state, right? So the first question I ask as an assembly person is why is it that it's $400 billion to implement Medicare for all? Why is it that in our state, despite the fact we have a higher population than Canada, that the cost of drugs, for example, in Canada is I believe less than 1/3 of what we pay right here in the United States? Why is it that hospital administration is so much more expensive for us? Right. And I think that when we talk about a Medicare for all bill, and particularly I'm talking strictly at a statewide level, I would like to see in that bill tackling really the inefficiency that we have in the price of healthcare, because it's my belief we are being artificially price gouged on a lot of things. I talk to, for example, constituents who tell me it's cheaper for her mom to get a hospital bed in a hospital room rather than installing a handrail for her mom to be able to walk. Right? There is a very confusing system of how even as a consumer, I come into the healthcare system and I demand certain services. And that has to be fixed because it's inefficient and it's artificially price gouging everyone. And that's what's going to get in the way of us passing a clean Medicare for all.
Java.
I want Johnny's got a question over there. We got a question from Johnny over here. Okay. Well, it seems to me, and I watched your campaign video, and it seems like you're approaching this whole situation listening, like a lot of filling that void of a lot of the videos you just listening to people, and it seems like there's a void. You said you want to represent your constituency. Well, you're going to run into a situation where if you get elected, you're going to be representing your constituency, and you're going to have this big, massive corporation force opposing you. What do you plan to do to bring about real systemic change within the state, within the assembly, if you get elected? How are you going to tackle this? In other words, how are we to be assured that we're going to send you there to fight the machine and not join it?
Absolutely. And I know that this is a rather ironic answer, but as someone who does come directly from the corporate world into the public sphere, I understand that there are certain levers that you can be able to push with those that oppose very key initiatives that are going to help our state move forward. And what I've often talked about in my campaign is that as antithetical to the idea of fighting the corporate machine is, you actually, when you propose legislation that can really propel the causes forward that we care about, like affordable housing, that is such a top issue for many constituents in District 25. You need to find a way to bring the corporations to the table to have a constructive dialogue as to what is their part in restoring the relationship with the communities that they reside in, and what feasibly in terms of what they pay in corporate taxes, in terms of what their responsibilities are when they decide to move into a metropolitan area and benefit from the labor force that is living there. What is their responsibility to that labor force, right? And I think that there is a certain accountability on the part of politicians to keep that conversation honest, that it's not just about not accepting corporate PAC money. It's about knowing what are the levers that you're going to engage with. For example, if you want to lobby statewide something sensible that says, okay, for technology companies that are moving into different metropolitan cities in our state, and that's going to cause with it perhaps some level of displacement and gentrification. What kind of taxes are we going to look at for the corporate tax rate that is going to force a certain generation of revenue that is put directly towards affordable housing, right? How are we going to keep them honest about seeing against the tax dollars that were spent, that did it actually go to affordable housing, or did it go to the coffers of those that were in bed with the corporate PACs or the donors of that identity and not to the actual citizens that it was supposed to represent. And see, I think that that is going to be a critical part of pushing back against the corrupting influence of money in politics, is not just seeing through that you don't take that sort of influence in how you run your campaign. It's about when you get there, do you enact legislation in concrete detail that specifies that transparency and that accountability? So that's what I believe is going to be the next step in achieving that solution.
But what are you going to do when you can't get any of that legislation enacted? And I love the fact that you're opening the door and your dialogue is listening. It really is impressive, don't get me wrong. But, I mean, what are you going to do when you don't get that legislation passed? Are you just going to join them, or are you going to, have town halls and speak of this? What are you going to do to make sure that we actually move forward with the systemic change that we need? Sorry for stuttering.
Yeah, yeah. And you're right. It's so important to build alliances within the assembly as well, to ensure that you're not the only lone ranger that is going at it with legislative initiatives that you propose. So what I'm going to say is, look, if, for example, your corporations don't agree to adhering to wage standards for your contractors, we're going to rally this entire district to write a letter to your local Ubers and your local Lyfts and say, we will all go on strike as drivers, for example, if you don't pay us a fair wage and you don't uphold your obligations under legislation AB5 that was recently passed, right? That we have to take it back to rallying the communities. We have to take it back to as not just holding the town halls, but we can walk out, we can strike, we can stay close to the ground in what is actually what can actually hold impact. I talk about, for example, the Uber and Lyft strike being such a key part in moving forward the legislation of AB5. I also think that, frankly, if the issue of Facebook not legislating the corrupting influence of ad money and corporate PAC money in political ads, if this doesn't become something that we resolve, measures that we can take as common citizens are for example, what the Facebook workers had done, writing this very good op-ed, frankly, on very sensible measures that the company can be taking, calling out, right, that why hasn't this been done before? As a legislator, that is what my responsibility, that if I can't get it passed, I will go straight to the people and I will put a mic on it and make sure that we give a voice to those people on the ground that are making that change in their own communities to make that statement. And what I believe is the problem that happens now, and what has happened in my district, is those activists, they'll get invited into the room for the photo op. You'll get, the politicians showing up for the climate activist protests. And then they take their picture and then they just go back and they don't try to find some kind of coalition to try again and get that legislation through. And I think it's important that when this is not your career, this is not something that you've done your whole life, you come in with that perspective of saying, I actually earned my right to be here by going to the people, by asking for their vote. And so I'm not going to take it for granted that I can just kind of show up for my photo op and not proactively do something about it after. That is that's just my position as somebody coming into it from the outside.
And you're right. I mean, it's going to take, it's not just about you once you get in there. It's going to take a people's movement, people getting involved in the political process, people writing to and calling their legislatures. So on that note, how do you feel about like college for all? I mean, because as a millennial myself, we have struggled with student loan debt. We have struggled with paying the ever increasing costs of tuition, and it's getting worse for the generations now. How do you feel about that? I mean, I think as a society, isn't it better for our people to have complete access to education without it costing them, a lifetime burden?
I totally agree that if we have any serious conversation about transitioning to the innovation economy with our kids, because that is something we talk about a lot in District 25, right? This is kind of the district in and of itself is sort of a hotbed of where a lot of these Silicon Valley companies are. Places like San Jose and Santa Clara. This is where this is where a lot of that workforce wants to go into, so you can't have that conversation with kids about, well, you need to get a college education to get there if you make the pathway so difficult that it's forcing kids to make that decision. Do I sign up for a life of debt, or do I get the tangible skills I need to participate in the 21st century economy? What I've proposed is comprehensive college cost reform that not only tackles the cost of tuition, it tackles the price gouging that happens on campus with your hospitality and your living. So what happens is, universities price gouge even things like groceries on campus and basically penalizing you for not owning a car. They contract often with these private sellers that for one unit, it'll probably be 20 to 50 cents more than what you would pay off campus for the same given grocery. These are just the little things that they do to price gouge students that are basically often having to take up second jobs to be able to just pay for the cost of living on campus. I talked to a mom who said the difference between a kid's on-campus living at UC Santa Cruz and off-campus living is about $5,000 per month. That is insane. And so not only do I believe that we have to tackle the cost of tuition, which I've proposed in a private public sector partnership type of method, we can implement an apprenticeship type of program where companies would actually cover the cost of your tuition attached to you interning and working for them. Something that I saw very successfully implemented with some companies at UC San Diego. I also believe that we need to comprehensively champion market rate or below market rate housing and living for our on-campus, residents in universities and for students to be able to not have to make the decision to run off to that second job, to just be able to live on campus and focus on actually being successful in school.
And it just seems this is another like state versus national issue, because nationally right now the push is to make public colleges tuition free, correct?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Are you opposed to that? And what is your opposition in that case, to just simplify it and say all public colleges and universities are free?
I think this once again comes back to the national dialogue versus the state dialogue, right? As a state legislator, I've got to answer to my constituents in District 25, how are you going to pay for it, right? And for us, one extremely sensible measure is that the companies that we see all around us, I mean, this entire district is made up of these multi-million-dollar companies that are getting, oodles of VC money. And there's a notion that there's something you can be paying into that system as well to help generate your own workforce, right? So as far as a national dialogue on the issue of tuition-free public college, I think that this is something that at some point we have to reckon with as a country. What are we proactively doing to really raise the next generation that creates a level playing field for everyone. And I think one of the issues I've had with tuition-free public college is that it's not a comprehensive look at the total cost of college. I agree that it's great that it's entered the mainstream, but you're not taking into account the multitude of other factors, like the fact that so many students in this country, for example, have to make the tough choice of commuting from a far off, from their parents' home every day, far off from college, and not be able to fully focus on being a student, because while it's tuition free, the cost of living on campus is not something we've had a proper conversation about in the entire debate over the cost of college. So that, frankly, is like what I come at with my position on this, is it has to be a much more inclusive conversation of all the issues surrounding financing.
And how do you feel about the debt? Like if you've taken out a student loan and how they pretty much the interest rates are ridiculous if you don't pay, and it just keeps building and building and building, and then you're 50 years old and you're still paying your student loans. Like, that shouldn't be a burden on our people.
I absolutely, and in fact, it's shameful that we have not done more for some of the predatory lending that's happened with some of these for-profit colleges, and not doing something about the loans that many of these folks took on, which was something that it's an issue where I think again, we're price gouging folks for doing the right thing and for trying to pursue the right path, and not taking proactive measures at the federal level to really step up and put a cap on it. Because look at who we have in power. It's people like Betsy DeVos. It's people that perpetuated that system to begin with, right? So I agree. I hope that we can see something at the federal level. Unfortunately, as much as the House has tried in earnest to take very tangible measures, frankly, it is going to take flipping the Senate for us to perhaps have some shot of getting this done nationally.
John, do you have a question?
Hey, Natasha, this is Jonny Tsunami on the ones and twos. I have a question to ask of you. When you join the state assembly, you have the option of, kind of pursuing certain committees that you can be a part of. Which committees are you interested in joining?
So I feel very strongly about joining the committee on technology, just because I think that this is something that we lack a lot in our legislation right now, even at the statewide level, that regulates, frankly, what we're putting on not just social media, but even from a consumer data, and frankly, even your own personal data that you're putting online. I think it's opening up so many policy questions for us right now that we don't have enough people in our legislature who have worked in the industry and kind of can also start writing the appropriate measures for us to regulate it properly. So I feel very strongly I would want to be part of that. I also feel quite strongly about, as an environmental policy major, being part of the Committee on Environment and implementing. Hopefully, we can get a statewide Green New Deal passed. I've proposed in my campaign a lot of ideas I have around that. And I would say finally that I feel strongly about the issue of education. I would want to definitely join a committee on education.
Can you tell me more about your statewide Green New Deal? What does that include? Because we have several Green New Deals going around nationally. What is yours in particular?
Yeah. So right now, in fact, in California, I should note that Assemblyman Bonta has proposed his own version of a Green New Deal, which is setting emissions standards and metrics. But for our version of the Green New Deal, I've proposed measures such as having a statewide connection to Caltrain by 2030 for every major metropolitan city, and talking about expanding what we call the PACE program. So what this is basically it is a program for properties to be able to convert to solar energy. And what I strongly feel is a necessary component of reinstating the PACE program is that we need subsidies for low-income housing, low-income areas to be able to make that transition for their residences. Because I think what is often missing from the conversation surrounding environmental initiatives is that low-income communities that are probably impacted the most by climate change are also given the least amount of options financially to be able to make that just transition. In recognition, for example, of the wildfires that have happened in our state, we have something called the California FAIR program. It's basically a wildfire insurance that you can get if you are not eligible to get private insurance for wildfires. So one of the things that we need to do in recognition of what issues our state is going on has going on, and what I think is a valuable part of the Green New Deal is extending the FAIR program to low-income communities that will receive some type of basic coverage to ensure that if they can afford insurance, that we don't just kind of penalize those who are most vulnerable, who are living in these areas. Sorry, can you not hear me?
Go ahead. Keep going.
Oh, okay. And and then the final part of one other proposition of our Green New Deal, expanding the REACH standards to all buildings throughout our state. And finally, we're introducing the concept of green bonds. So something that it's been talked about in prior elections, but one of the things that's also valuable is that this is going to create a lot of investment in private industry to help us make the just transition to a green economy. And I want to make sure that we don't lose out as private citizens on all of that. And so one of the things that we've proposed is sort of like a green bonds program where a mutual fund, if you will, of that would be available to residents that for all of this investment that's going to happen in a lot of these interrelated industries that are going to help us get there, that, there's some type of option all of you as residents can opt into to benefit from that.
Did you have a follow-up?
No, go ahead.
All right, there's some people on the chat that are saying a few things I wanted to follow up, and thank you for your last answer. It's interesting. Green bonds. I would like to talk a little bit more of that. But somebody says that you accept no PAC money. You have a completely volunteer staff. But Brilliant Wonderful says also that California has one of the biggest prison populations in the country. What is your stance on criminal justice reform? And even more specific, where do you stand on SB 10, the Future Crime Minority Bill, which California attorneys for the Criminal Justice Defense Bar just opposed?
Okay. Unfortunately, I am not totally familiar with SB 10, but I'll certainly look into what unless do you have a brief summary of
No, it was
SB?
somebody from our audience who was asking the question, but it was on the where do you stand on criminal justice reform? Yeah, I bet you got a good answer. So.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I am somebody that believes that one of the parts of the criminal justice reform conversation that I think has been missing is how do we first of all, transition those that have been formerly incarcerated back into our society to, lead sort of a meaningful life. Because I think there's one half of criminal justice reform that talks about police brutality and sort of the injustice of what communities it is targeted, right? There's another half of that conversation of, well, those who are formerly incarcerated, how do we kind of bring them back into the fold? And in fact, it's still, even though California has done a lot to try and progress this issue, and most recently, I was really heartwarmed to see that we did pass a law that bans for-profit prisons in California and ends a lot of this injustice that happens in an industry that perpetuates a lot of human rights abuses. I see that we still haven't gotten to the point where for the formerly incarcerated, applying for a job, being able to qualify for housing, being able to rebuild your life afterwards is a path that is clean and that really does get them back into the fold of leading a meaningful and a life that can thrive, right? And so that is where I stand on criminal justice reform in the sense of not just proactively in our communities tackling the issue of police brutality in, frankly, instituting measures such as I support using body cameras, for our police force to at least introduce a little bit more transparency into the process. And I also believe that we need to do a lot more when it comes to housing reform in ensuring that our formerly incarcerated have a pathway towards basically, reintroducing themselves into, into the working world and into society as well.
Do you have any opinions on bail reform?
On what reform?
Bail reform.
Bail reform? Yes, I would support bail reform. I think it is something that unfairly favors those who are, of basically more privileged, economic set. I think it's become unfortunately all too common in the news that we see, for example, someone like Felicity Huffman getting a slap on the wrist for a college admission scandal, and then we see, perhaps a young man that has been caught for stealing, a bag of candy or something for, years and years at a time, and losing their life over the fact that they can't even pay the bail. It is something that unfortunately justice is slow, but I believe if we put more people in there, that this is something that really, they prioritize as a legislative initiative. Hopefully we can move this forward.
So with the presidential elections going on, have you endorsed a presidential candidate, and how do you feel about how the race is moving thus far?
Yeah, so I should first of all be explicit that I did proactively campaign for a presidential candidate before I decided to run. I was campaigning for Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Let me just say that I think one of the most heartwarming parts of this process that I've seen with the national dialogue is that you're seeing right now that the Democratic Party is being forced to really reckon with the actual sentiment and pulse of where the majority of this country really is. Look at the top three candidates, right? It's basically Biden, Bernie, and Warren. And Bernie and Warren in particular have just completely, and especially Bernie, he has moved the needle on kind of what I think what needs to not just be a message that is about being against something, it's about being for something. It's not just about defeating Donald Trump. The dialogue of this race is about what are you really going to do to be authentically democratic, in that you are actually representing the constituency that you're running to represent, that you're actually showing up in the communities that are most affected by the top issues of our time. I really do think that one of the best parts about this is that it's opened a new chapter in representation in politics, by what kind of campaign, especially Bernie and I think to a certain degree as well, Elizabeth Warren is really running, where they're saying, look, we are not going to run this in the way of taking for granted that if we don't show up in Michigan and Wisconsin, that we'll just kind of get the vote. I think there was a sort of a wake-up call there, right? That you got to actually walk through and connect with people and listen to what they are saying. So that's and I think it's starting to affect the state races as well. I think people are really listening, and that's why in our campaign, we're actually walking the precincts. We're actually getting the signatures. We're not just riding on endorsements and PAC money and, that kind of old school cigar room kind of politics. And I think that is a very good thing.
But don't you think that there's some form of that with the man you just worked for and Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren? It's the same old, where they are taking that corporate money again. In other words, I like a lot what you have to say when it comes to policy and listening, but I'm lacking the fire from Pete Buttigieg, and I'm also questioning where they take this money from. And both Pete Buttigieg, and he hired one of the Goldman Sachs biggest person to run his campaign, and Elizabeth Warren, we see these money ties. Aren't you concerned that it's still a little bit more of the dancing two-step and it's the same old?
Let me just, if I may, I believe that those of us that have come from private industry, right? I have to be authentic with you that I am somebody that did start out in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of stereotypes about Silicon Valley, that it's filled with these, and by the way, some of it is true. There are self-obsessed, egotistical people. There are people that are so obsessed with just getting ahead and stepping on toes and not doing things ethically. There's a lot of examples of that, right? There's also a segment of our society where there are people that have done really well, but who want to have some part in perhaps giving some of that back and doing something in a positive direction. Okay. And I'm someone who's questioning openly, I guess, when you ask me, is Elizabeth Warren or is Pete or is a Cory Booker or whoever, are they part and parcel of advancing that corruption because they they hired someone who worked for Facebook, they hired someone who worked for Goldman Sachs, or are they, are they hiring people based on the virtues that they care about advancing, and they happen to come from those institutions? And I guess I'm questioning for myself whether do we completely block them out of the conversation because they happen to have worked, in a tech job, in a decorated kind of corporate career, right, or of some sort. Does it mean that they completely protect the system that held working people down to begin with? Are they incapable, perhaps, of acknowledging what was their part in perpetuating the financial crisis or perpetuating certain inequality that has really directly hurt working people? As somebody who campaigned for Pete, let me just say that, if you look at the substance of the policies, I don't think it came out of the Heritage Foundation, some of what, he's talking about, right? Now, the fact that he and perhaps, I don't know if Elizabeth Warren I believe Wall Street has in fact written off giving anything to Elizabeth Warren, or they've been very uncomfortable with a Warren candidacy because she has been in fact so vocal against Wall Street. So, I mean, I don't know. Do we take that to be that they are representative of that industry? To me, no. I don't personally believe that, but that's a question I think existentially as a Democratic Party we have to ask that too. Do we completely shut out those who want to do the right thing and they happen to not look like the typical Democrat?
And I agree with you in the sense of that, that there is redemption. I mean, we do it with the Republicans too. The Democrats say, oh, everybody who's a Republican is a racist. And I think it would be hypocritical of us to assume that every person that's ever worked for tech is going to be corrupt. But I think what progressives always follow is they follow the money. And, when you take that money, and I know you're 100% corporate PAC free, but when others take that money, it tells us, it signals to us like, okay, are you going to look to our interests, to the people's interests? Or if you're taking that big pharma money like Cory Booker was, or if you're taking that insurance money from your daughter's foundation like Elizabeth Warren was, or if you're taking, whatever that money is, like, how do I trust you when that money is coming directly to you? And I think that's essentially what is the progressive movement, like we are so like staunch on, because it's like you can say whatever you want on Twitter, you can say whatever is needed, but what's happening behind the scenes is when you take that money, now that signals to me that your loyalty is in question now, because I don't know where your vote is going to be upon that legislation.
Yeah.
And perhaps a larger question too is, I see in our own race for some of these candidates running, is there a point where they go, do the ends justify the means? Do I take it because frankly it takes money to run, this is where it came from, and this is the only way I can stay in the race and actually fight for the issues that I care about, and that really will represent those that aren't in the aren't in the moneyed class. They're people that are average working people that I can represent, but I can't get there unless I don't. I mean, look at AOC, right? She even accepted, and it's an openly disclosed thing, that she accepted $3,000 from Google. Right. Mm-hmm. Now, does that mean that she's not gonna she's not gonna give Sundar Pichai any breaks if he goes in for a hearing with her, right?
Right.
So again, I guess I'm just openly questioning, and maybe and I can't claim that just because I worked for Pete Buttigieg, I know exactly where his headspace is at or not, but I can certainly say for myself, as someone who isn't, and by the way, I have not accepted any corporate PAC money. I have not, I'm really, I'm not accepting lobbyist money. I guess I'm asking for myself is at what point do we say, well, if Apple is willing to give $2.5 billion to build affordable housing in San Jose, and we want to say the tech companies are not supposed to be at all a part of the political dialogue. When do we also kind of ask ourselves that it's important to see where your money is coming from, but it's also important to see that there has to be a pathway for those in the position of privilege in our society to participate in being part of the solution. I guess that's my question in all of this.
Yeah. You know what it is too? Here you have a very nuanced thing about you, and that's great. And I love the fact that you're willing to sit down, talk to both sides. But here's the thing that concerns me is that when I look at you, I see a lot of ideas for policy, nuanced conversations where we're not talking about the, certain issues when we are talking about certain issues,
which is what we need.
But here's the thing we don't see, and it's concerning to me. And if you can address my audience right now, our audience, and tell them now, we don't see that picture of you of a bullhorn in your hand, a fighter in the street, walking, an activist more, getting out there where we can see and we say her heart, her passion is there. Yeah, she's going to be great. She has a nuanced thing about her when she comes to policy, and when she gets in there, she's going to understand things. She's very smart. She's very articulate. But I don't see the passion. I don't see the fire. Why am I going to stand behind her where it seems like she could do a Pete Buttigieg and kind of talk us on both sides, but really not give us that position that we need, not give us that heart, not give us that fire?
And I would tell you that, there are two ways of fighting. There's the fighting where you're right. You stand with the bullhorn. You're out there and you're screaming, right? And I've also observed that sometimes the quiet confidence of those that, you don't observe them every day, but that they sit and they really imbibe and try to, with championing a message that is earnest, that is sincere, and that cares, that you, I think, can get a lot more done in terms of what can actually tangibly come out of this process that is frankly I cannot tell you how toxic I have discovered at the local level this really is to block outsiders from running. That you can actually move the needle forward if you say, you know what, I'm not going to shout. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to try and see, by knowing and understanding the issues entirely, that this is what we can do to champion the boldest solution forward. That doesn't just put us in a situation of gridlock. Because to be very honest with you, I see what you're saying about the bullhorn. I see what you're saying about being so, I guess, outwardly you look passionate, right?
Yeah.
But what's happening right now in California is that you do have those that in the California Democratic Party that they want to tout a lot of these bold things, and then people on the ground see that when you pass the affordable housing measure that looked so ambitious and it looked like the greatest proposal, that 3 years later, after I paid into it, you didn't do anything with it. You gave a lot of talk, and then you ended up paying some lobbyist or consultant in the back. So look, that's where I stand, right? That you have to also present some accountability behind that bark. And you can't just, I think fighting is not the only part of this. I think actually being someone that is sincere is part of it too. There are multiple ways to fight for an issue. That's what I believe.
Right. There's a pragmatic approach of sitting down and working with what you got. And I understand, because California is it's riddled with the establishment. I mean, like, looking at you and looking at what's actually in there is, I mean, you are, eons away from to the left and to progress than what someone like Nancy Pelosi is, or somebody like Dianne Feinstein is, the old blue dog type of Democrats. On that note, I just wanted to know where were you in the 2015-2016 election that led us to Donald Trump? Were you supporting Hillary? Were you supporting Bernie? Which candidates were you looking at during the primary, and who did you end up voting for, of course, in the general?
In the primary, I did really like Bernie, and I favored him. By the way, shame on me, I did not vote in that primary because I completely forgot about the primary date in California. So shame on me, but I would have voted for Bernie. But for the general, I did vote for Hillary Clinton as the nominee. Let me just say, I think as somebody that watched that, I felt personally affected in a deep sense because I felt like the Obama era for me as a brown kid that grew up in a predominantly conservative town in California. I grew up in Danville. The Obama era to me was sort of the one thing that happened in my lifetime that eclipsed all of this talk we used to have about a melting pot and everybody can get a fair shot at being anything they want to be in America. Well, his presidency and what he represented for me was actually the realization of that. And the election of Donald Trump was sort of saying, no, putting the brakes on that. That's not, that's not how we're going. It was a backlash against whatever he had represented. That was the realization of that dream, and saying we're going to build a wall, and saying we're going to, we're going to relegate women to this position where their voice doesn't matter, and you can do whatever you want. If you're a star, they'll let you do it, right? It was a complete 180 on that, and and I feel like Bernie is one of those people that I think he used to tell it like it was. And I think, Hillary was, unfortunately, what happened with her is, and I feel she is in some ways a misunderstood politician, but that she was part and parcel trying to be in a system that rewarded a certain kind of politics, rewarded a certain kind of navigation. She was trying to navigate it too as a woman, and paid the price for it. Right. And, and I think it was something that illuminated just a lot of ugly truths. And I don't think that the politics of Hillary Clinton fits in the time that we live in now. But I'll tell you one thing, that I felt like she kind of, from both sides, couldn't kind of make it one way or the other, because she had built her career kind of having to navigate that system that was there before. Because that's the way things were set up. And it ended up that was what the perception and stereotype that was what screwed her over in the end.
So I voted for Obama when I was younger, obviously, and I thought he was going to bring us hope and change. And I honestly didn't see the realization of that. I thought he bailed out Wall Street. He did a lot of things economically that led to the election of Donald Trump. And it's been an ongoing process since Reagan and, the deregulation of banks and corporations, and through Bill Clinton's presidency. I feel like that all of those things combined, right, got us to a point where people were willing to vote for somebody like Donald Trump over somebody like Hillary Clinton. And also Hillary Clinton, of course, like you mentioned before, not campaigning in the places where she should have campaigned, in Michigan and in Wisconsin. She completely ignored what people felt. And so, in my opinion, how do we, what can we do to, not just, say we got to defeat Donald Trump and the Republican mentality, but defeat the policies that led to Donald Trump? Because you yourself said it's not about only defeating Donald Trump. It's also about the corruption in the Democratic Party. How do we get that out?
Absolutely. First of all, let me just say, I've heard a lot from the progressive movement that they were disappointed in Obama. And let me just say, he may have not accomplished all of our goals, but I can tell you, as someone who was a young graduate in 2013 and was really blessed to go into an economy where there was actually, some semblance of job growth after what I had seen for the past 4 years in college, that people like us were able to go into the workforce and able to build up from there again. Personally, I'm very grateful that we had somebody at the helm who actually knew what they were doing and tried to recover things around. And I agree with you that the Wall Street bailouts, it was, of course, an egregious example with guys like Tim Geithner at the helm of, kind of dictating how that was going to go. But I would also tell you there were a lot of middle class people too who benefited from much of the Recovery Act that was put in place. But as far as your earlier question, how do we rid the corrupting influence of politics? And I think the example of Obama is a great example, because what you have, unfortunately, is there are so many of these so-called kingmakers that are controlling who's going to run. Do you have permission to run? Did you consult with me before running? Then party rules in place as to, even during the petitioning process to get on the ballot, that, well, you've got to submit this many signatures. They have to be X, Y, and Z checkmarked for, do you have specifics on the address, the registration, the certain threshold? Did we accept it if the signature matched what we had on file, if they put their first initial or the last, right? All of these arcane rules that are really put in place, even at the micro level, to make it hard for people that are outside the system to run, and to rid the system of those that are kind of preserving a certain way of work that keeps them in power, right? And so, what happens is you may be a politician that's willing to do the right thing, but because we've got that gridlock and that castle built for so long, they're forced to accept certain parts of that system that otherwise are unsavory to them, right? That's what happened with Obama. Now that we've kind of blown the top off of all of this happening. We've seen with the candidacy of AOC, we've seen it with Bernie, that now it's starting to, now people have woken up, they're going to participate in their process. The biggest way you can break this block is get the voters more engaged in not just the process of voting, but the process of showing up for every proposition, every ballot initiative, every person down to your city council who's looking to represent you. If they're not actually showing up at your door, they're not showing that they're a candidate that is going out and trying to earn the vote, and you see these people who are just kind of put in place in a seat, well, that has to be called out, and that has to be curtailed with a lot of civic engagement. Despite the fact that the impeachment issue is such a hot topic, that you're seeing such egregious examples of corruption, I don't see people taking to the streets the way that you saw in Puerto Rico with the oust of the, I believe it was the president or the governor, who was found to be exchanging these very lewd texts and, misogynistic and homophobic kind of language. We don't see that level of it here in the U.S. I mean, it's a fraction compared to what we would see in another country. Yeah. That's what it's going to take to rid us of it.
Yeah, I also think, though, the reason why they were out there in the streets is because the man was tied in with the corruption with the hedge funds that were really crippled Puerto Rico. The other issues were just putting it over the top. Are you for or against impeachment? Because I see a lack of accountability from you when it comes to Obama, Hillary Clinton, and if it comes to impeachment, why would you want to stake your claim on impeachment in Ukraine when it was the Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, Hunter Biden, who were so corrupt in the Ukraine? How do you expect people to get in the streets for impeachment in Ukraine when it was the party who should be held accountable that's trying to impeach the president on this particular issue?
Well, okay. Are you saying that they caused the Ukraine issue to, Nancy Pelosi and Hunter Biden caused the Ukraine issue to begin with? Is that what?
Are you familiar with the regime change and the perpetuating of the regime change? How Adam Schiff had.
You're talking about that issue.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what Ukraine's about. I mean, why would we crush any institution and tell a president he's not allowed to look into corruption when they had their hands deep in corruption?
In other words, if both of them are involved in the corruption, then the impeachment process inquiry is against Donald Trump. I mean, I'm all for impeachment on emoluments, but I feel like impeaching him on the Ukrainian issue is hypocritical, unless, of course, everybody else comes out and says, hey, we're also guilty of this. And then so now we do a full-on investigation of everything, because otherwise I feel like it just helps him, because a lot of people feel now they're putting him as a victim. And now we're in an election where we're so focused on in the impeachment process. And then we might put someone in that can't defeat him. And then, of course, he gets reelected. And I think that's what people don't want to happen.
Okay, well, let me just say, so first of all, I am for impeachment, and in this particular example, I don't care if it was Pelosi, Hillary, or whoever was involved in basically moving this along. We need to find out everything, right? I'm not sitting here and saying that that if Barack Obama had any hand in this, perhaps going through, that we shouldn't find out about that, and that we shouldn't go as a voting body. That why is it that this just sort of fell through the cracks? I Let me take it back even a step further. When the Obama administration knew that they had intelligence, right, that the Russians were trying to interfere in our election, why is it that the FBI did not call this out, but they called out Hillary for the emails, right? This should have been something that was everybody was made aware of it, and that as a constituency that we should have been not kept in the dark about these certain elements of basically how the entire system of our democracy was corrupted. So look, I say this is not a Republican issue. This is not a Democratic issue. This is a issue of is your government actually working? Okay. And, I would say that we need to have full impeachment hearings, and I respectfully push back on the notion that we have to make some kind of false equivalency between what is happening with Donald Trump and what happened with Barack Obama. Because let me tell you, as much as things, I'm sure that we can find examples in the Obama administration of lapses in judgment or perhaps of a certain degree of corruption, but to equate with what what Donald Trump has done, respectfully, I don't agree with that kind of equivalent. It's just not. This era just feels so unlike that one, and I think you saw at Elijah Cummings' funeral this overriding notion, even from progressives like Cenk Uygur, that said, to watch him. Deliver that and talk about the role of government that way. It was refreshing. It felt like a pause from the chaos that we are in right now.
So kind of to just transition back into California, just to finish up, what is your biggest issue? What do you believe is your biggest issue for Californians? Because you're running for a position that's just strictly statewide. What is the biggest issue right now that you think Californians need?
So I think that for Californians, they need to restore their faith that their government is actually working for them in very visible solutions that happen in their own communities. That's what I feel is the biggest pain point for this district. I think you're dealing with a constituency that is very politically disengaged because they have not seen that for very basic promises like we're going to increase transit in the state so that we ease your pain on the 880 or the 101 every day going to work. Well, they see bond after bond is passed, and yet, for all of the taxes that they're paying, nothing is done about it, and it continues to hurt families by having this problem continue. You see that, a lot of people talk about affordable housing, but you don't tangibly see the impact in your own neighborhood of these programs, right? I think that is the biggest issue for California, restoring that faith in a government that is actually working for you, that all of these programs we've established that sound great on paper, there's actually a manifestation of that in our communities that is visible and that makes people feel, frankly, like their government is listening to them.
Okay. And just where can we find more information about your... Oh, okay, go ahead.
Well, I just have one last question. Who in California, politician-wise, do you like and you look forward to working with? And who do you dislike and you just don't want to work with?
I think that I think that in the assembly, Assemblyman Bonta has done wonderful work, and also Assemblyman Scott Wiener actually has really advanced a lot of legislation, particularly on the topic of housing, that I think really does look forward. Assemblyman Berman as well has done some great advocacy. I think that those are definite champions of moving us in a progressive direction, but also have tremendous level of knowledge and I would say just such a comprehensive look at implementable solutions that are thought through in detail. So I think I really would look forward to working with some of them on these key initiatives for our state. Look, dislike's a strong word, but I do think that we I think right now we have kind of a contentious relationship with the Republican Party in general in California. So it's going to be tough to crack that because right now with the supermajority, I think they are dealing with an incredibly vocal progressive left that makes the other side all the more cumbersome to crack. When there are certain initiatives that you're going to have to achieve a level of bipartisanship, and so it's not dislike, but it's going to be. I perceive that as one of the big challenges of moving into this role.
Okay, and just where can people find more information on you?
Yeah, so Gupta2020.com is our website, or you can follow us on Facebook at Gupta4 Assembly.
Okay, well, best of luck, and thank you for coming on and the show and having this interview with us and answering our questions. I know we're very thorough and we're tough. So thank you so much for coming on and answering honestly.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you so
really
much.
appreciate it, Natasha. I really like what you had to say. This is Jonny Tsunami. Something that I would like to see my the people that are running for an office, is an awareness of foreign policy and past foreign policy decisions, an awareness of the corruption, particularly with Hillary Clinton. And you did mention earlier how someone says, when you haven't cleared with me that you're running or something like that. That person that's making that is the queen of the Democrats is Hillary Clinton, I think. I want to like you, but I'm not sure. Campaigning for Buttigieg, he's not a true progressive. You have to look into the details of his mayor candidacy. That Fiorella did actually a great video. To me, it also sounds like you watch a lot of mainstream media like CNN, MSNBC. Perhaps you're just not informed that they are perpetuating propaganda on a daily basis. Yeah, I really like what you had to say, and I really like you coming on the show.
So thank you very much for answering the questions honestly, and best of luck in your campaign.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
Bye, Natasha.
Bye.